Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women, Autobiographical Sketches by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, published in 1895. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 2, Episode 26. A quick content note. This episode includes a brief description of a Civil War battlefield. If you prefer to avoid the subject, please rejoin us at our next book in Season 3. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you would like to recommend a text, please email us at explorationdreamland, all one word, @gmail.com. You can also find our episodes on YouTube. Please subscribe or follow and review us wherever you find us. Your actions will help others find us too. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. In the full tide of our medical activity in New York, with a growing private practice and increasing hospital claims, the great catastrophe of civil war overwhelmed the country and dominated every other interest. The first shot at Fort Sumter aroused the whole North, and the assassination of Lincoln enlisted the indignant energy of every Northern woman in the tremendous struggle. As the deadly contest proceeded, and every town and village sent forth its volunteers to the fearful slaughter of civil war, the concentration of thought and action on the war dwarfed every other effort. The war was essentially a rebellion by a portion of the states for the maintenance of slavery. To us, nourished from childhood on the idea of human freedom and justice, the contest became of absorbing interest. Though our American friends often reproached us as Englishwomen for the action of the English government, we threw ourselves energetically into the cause of freedom. On the outbreak of the war, an informal meeting of the lady managers was called at the infirmary to see what could be done towards supplying the want of trained nurses so widely felt after the first battles. A notice of this meeting to be held at the infirmary having accidentally found its way into the New York Times, the parlors of the infirmary were crowded with ladies, to the surprise of the little group of managers. The Reverend Dr. Bellows and Dr. Elisha Harris being present, a formal meeting was organized. Whilst the great and urgent need of a supply of nurses was fully recognized, it was also felt that the movement would be too vast to be carried on by so small an institution. A letter was therefore drafted on this occasion, calling for a public meeting at the Cooper Institute, and a committee of the ladies present was appointed to obtain signatures to this call. The meeting at the Cooper Institute was crowded to overflowing. The National Sanitary Aid Association was then formed in order to organize the energetic efforts to help that were being made all over the country. The Ladies' Sanitary Aid Association, of which we were active members, was also formed. This branch worked daily at the Cooper Institute during the whole of the war. It received and forwarded contributions of comforts for the soldiers, zealously sent from the country, but its special work was the forwarding of nurses to the seat of war. All that could be done in the extreme urgency of the need was to sift out the most promising women from the multitudes that applied to be sent on as nurses, put them for a month in training at the great Bellevue Hospital of New York, which consented to receive relays of volunteers, provide them with a small outfit, and send them on for distribution to Miss Dix, who was appointed superintendent of nurses at Washington. The career of one of these nurses, a German, deserves recording. We hesitated about receiving her on account of her excitable disposition, but she insisted on going. This feeble-looking woman soon drifted away from the Washington depot to the active service of the front. After the Battle of Gettysburg, she spent 2 days and nights on the field of slaughter, wading with men's boots in the blood and mud, pulling out the still-living bodies from the heaps of slain, binding up hideous wounds, giving a draught of water to one, placing a rough pillow under the head of another, in an enthusiasm of beneficence which triumphed equally over thought of self and horror of the hideous slaughter. A welcome relief to the great tension of life during those years was the visit of Mr. Herman Bicknell, F.R.C.S., who was traveling in America after the death of his wife. I remembered him as a fellow student of the St. Bartholomew's days, who sat by me in the lecture room, and he recalled many interesting reminiscences of that eventful time. He was a man of great though eccentric talent, and a clever Persian scholar, having resided long in the East. His cordial friendship during many later years was much prized, and continued until his premature death. It was not until this great national rebellion was ended that the next step in the growth of the infirmary could be taken. The infirmary service of young assistant physicians, which had been hitherto supplied by students whose theoretical training had been obtained elsewhere, no longer met the New York needs. In 1865, the trustees of the infirmary, finding that the institution was established in public favor, applied to the legislature for a charter conferring college powers upon it. They took this step by the strong advice of some of the leading physicians of New York interested in the infirmary, who urged that the medical education of women should not be allowed to pass into the hands of the irresponsible persons who were at that time seeking to establish a woman's college in New York. We took this step, however, with hesitation, for our own feeling was adverse to the formation of an entirely separate school for women. The first women physicians connected with the infirmary, having all been educated in the ordinary medical schools, felt very strongly the advantage of admission to the large organized system of public instruction already existing for men, and also the benefits arising from association with men as instructors and companions in the early years of medical study. They renewed their efforts, therefore, to induce some good recognized New York school to admit, under suitable arrangements, a class of students guaranteed by the infirmary, rather than add another to the list of female colleges already existing. Finding, however, after consultation with the different New York schools, that such arrangements could not at present be made, the trustees followed the advice of their consulting staff, obtained a college charter, and opened a subscription for a college fund. The use of a spacious lecture room in the New York University on Washington Square was temporarily obtained until the house adjoining the infirmary could be leased and fitted for college purposes. Footnote 7. The fine property on Stuyvesant Square at the corner of East 15th Street has since been purchased and is now the site of the New York Infirmary and College. End footnote. A full course of college instruction was gradually organized, with the important improvement of establishing the subject of hygiene as one of the principal professional chairs, thus making it an equal as well as obligatory study. Another important improvement adopted was the establishment of an examination board, independent of the teaching staff, a plan not then customary in the United States. This board was composed of some of the best-known members of the profession, and at the same time we changed the ordinary term of medical study from 3 years to 4. During the early years of the college, I occupied the chair of hygiene and had the pleasure of welcoming Miss Jex Blake, then visiting America, as a member of the first class. The professor of hygiene also superintended the important work of the sanitary visitor at the homes of the poor. It has always seemed to me, during many years of active private practice, that the first and constant aim of the family physician should be to diffuse the sanitary knowledge which would enable parents to bring up healthy children. Chapter 7. Return to England, 1869. In 1869, the early pioneer work in America was ended. During the 20 years which followed the graduation of the first woman physician, the public recognition of the justice and advantage of such a measure had steadily grown. Throughout the northern states, the free and equal entrance of women into the profession of medicine was secured. In Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, special medical schools for women were sanctioned by the legislatures, and in some long-established colleges, women were received as students in the ordinary classes. Our New York Center was well organized under able guidance, and I determined to return to England for a temporary, though prolonged, residence, both to renew physical strength, which had been severely tried, and to enlarge my experience of life, as well as to assist in the pioneer work so bravely commencing in London, and which extended later to Edinburgh. I soon found that social questions of vital importance to human progress were taking root in the prepared soil of the older civilization, questions which were of absorbing interest. During the following 20 years, the responsibility of the Christian physician assumed to me an ever-deepening significance. After a refreshing tour in the lovely Lake District, arranged by my old friend Herman Bicknell, we attended the Social Science Congress held in Bristol in September of 1869. This was indeed a noteworthy experience. I was the guest with Miss Mary Carpenter of her relations, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. One morning, Miss Carpenter came into my room with her hands full of papers, saying, "These papers refer to a subject that you must take up. It is to be discussed at a sectional meeting today, from which all women are excluded, but you, as a doctor, have a right to be present and will be admitted, and you must attend. This formed my introduction to that tremendous campaign against the unequal standard of sexual morality known as the repeal of the Contagious Diseases Acts, in which for the following 17 years I was to take an active part, and which, from its extended bearings, molded the whole of my future life. The study of the papers thus brought to my notice by Miss Carpenter was a revelation to me. Perhaps, happily for me, during my past life and medical experiences, I had never fully realized the wide bearing of this subject and the inevitable social degradation produced by a double standard of morality. My eyes were now suddenly opened, never to be closed again, to that direful purchase of women which is really the greatest obstacle to the progress of the race. Ignorant as I then was of the various aspects of the Contagious Diseases Acts, I instantly perceived their injustice and at once accepted the difficult mission Miss Carpenter laid upon me. It was hoped by some members of the Congress that a resolution would be passed supporting the one-sided Contagious Diseases Act legislation, against which a strong opposition was beginning to arise, and I resolved that the voice of one member of the Congress, at any rate, should support the foundation of morality, viz., equal justice. I therefore attended the section held at the blind asylum, sitting far back in that assemblage of men. I soon found, however, to my immense relief and gratitude, that the cause of justice was in able hands, led by Professor Francis Newman, so I gladly withdrew from a painful position in that sectional meeting, my advocacy not being needed. I was privileged at this time to make the acquaintance of the Reverend Charles Kingsley and his generous-hearted wife. On our first meeting, at an evening party, Mr. Kingsley overwhelmed me by his enthusiastic greeting. "You are one of my heroes," he said, a speech which I really could not then understand. It seemed to stun me in my quiet life. Later, as I learned to know his enthusiastic character and profound social insight, I knew his meaning. A sincere personal friendship was then begun. He supported me by constant and wise counsel until the time of his lamented death, which was indeed a severe personal loss. I was warmly welcomed to the rectory of Eversley and later to the deanery of Chester. On the pleasant and historic pine hills of Bramshill, by the Eversley parsonage, and on the ancient walls of Chester, with their noble outlook to the Welsh mountains, when visiting the deanery, I enjoyed memorable walks with this generous-hearted man, when he threw open his delightful stores of natural history and strengthened me by his social wisdom. An amusing personal experience at the Bristol Congress was a breakfast of all the religions, organized by my eccentric friend Herman Bicknell, and at which he insisted that I should help him preside. He said to me, "Holyoake is an atheist, Cowell Stepney a materialist, Banerjee and Chatterjee are of the Hindu Brahma Samaj, you are a Christian, and I am a Catholic. It will be a most remarkable gathering, and the discussion of such varied opinions extremely interesting." I accepted the queer invitation. The breakfast was held in a large parlor of the hotel. We assembled at table, and one of the first things the very deaf gentleman on my right hand said to me was, "What an extraordinary, odd notion that of a soul is! I wonder how it could have arisen." But the most interesting remark by far was made by Holyoake, who, returning from a secularist meeting of Bristol working men, was at once accosted by our host. "Now, Holyoake, pray let us have your famous demonstration of the non-existence of a God." Mr. Holyoake accepted the demand, and thought for some time in a profound silence. Then, with a puzzled face, he suddenly burst out, "Upon my word, Bicknell, I have really quite forgotten it." Mr. Kingsley once said to me, pointing to Holyoake, "That man, many years ago, I put into prison for blasphemy. Now I am begging him to come down and visit me at Eversley." Our breakfast of all the religions as an active contest was a failure. The hostile forces met together, but instead of fighting, they fraternized. It was during this visit to Bristol in 1869 that the curious experience already referred to occurred, when I visited the house where my early childhood was spent. On settling in London as a physician, I resided for some time with my valued friend Barbara Lee Smith, then Madame Bodichon, at whose house in Blandford Square I met her wide and varied circle of literary and artistic friends and many leaders of social reform. Herbert Spencer, Dante Rossetti, Mrs. Lewes, the Peter Taylors, Mrs. Crashaw, Miss Goldsmid, Miss Cobb, and Keshub Chunder Sen represent a few of the persons I was privileged to meet. At this time I had engaged medical consultation rooms in an apparently respectable house in York Place, on the front door of which the house agent allowed me to place my name. I soon found, however, that my doctor's sign was intended to conceal the dubious character of the occupier of the house, and I had unconsciously walked into the trap. But friends came to the rescue and compelled the cancelling of the lease with which I was entangled. I then established myself at No. 6 Burwood Place, where the commencement of a promising medical practice was soon formed. I eagerly entered upon the varied and intensely interesting social life now opened to me. My long-cherished conviction of the supreme importance of the medical profession as the great conservator of health constantly deepened. In 1870, being invited to address the Working Women's College, I took as the subject of my discourse, "How to Keep a Household in Health." This lecture laid down rules of health for the guidance of poor women in the management of their households, and was welcomed by the audience. One person present, however, sent a slanderous account of this lecture to the Pall Mall Gazette, and I was overwhelmed by the receipt of anonymous letters, and letters from persons in all classes of society, requesting medical advice on the most important and delicate subjects which are only suitable for the confidential counsel of the physician's consulting room, where alone advice adapted to each individual case can be judiciously given. I mentioned this experience of the newspaper attack and the subsequent correspondence to my friend Mr. Kingsley. He exclaimed, "Oh, you did not answer those letters, I trust." I assured him that I had always refused to give the advice asked for by letter, and had invariably returned fees when enclosed. "Thank God for that," he exclaimed with an energy that amazed me. And he then related to me a very painful experience of his own, saying, "Let me warn you, never answer a newspaper attack. There are some newspapers that delight in getting hold of a scandal, or whatever may make their paper sell, and are utterly unscrupulous as to the means by which such a purpose is accomplished. You have no chance against such corrupt speculation. Your only weapon is silence and your own established character. On February 19, 1871, under the auspices of the Sunday Lecture Society, I gave an address on the religion of health to a large appreciative audience in St. George's Hall. The same year, a small meeting was held in the drawing-room of 6 Burwood Place to consider the important subject of a steady and wide diffusion of sanitary knowledge among all the people. There, the National Health Society was formed, for which Mr. Prout Newcomb, who was present, shaped the stamp of the society, with its motto, "Prevention is better than cure." This society, which established its first office in Berners Street under the intelligent secretaryship of Miss Toulmin Smith, continues its enlarging sphere of usefulness under the able management of Miss Fay Lancaster. At this time, the medical dispensary established by Miss Garrett for women and children in Seymour Place was growing and enlisting a large number of influential friends. From this small beginning has grown the new hospital and London School of Medicine for Women, connected with the Royal Free Hospital. This is not the place to speak of the intelligent and persevering efforts to which those institutions owe their origin. The work of Dr. Garrett Anderson and Dr. Sophia Jex Blake will always be remembered. It was my privilege and pleasure, in some small degree, to encourage these brave workers in their pioneer enterprise in England. Whilst attending to an increasing medical practice, a visit from Mr. William Pear, who had written an interesting account of the Relaxation land experiment in Ireland, which proved so successful under the management of Mr. E. T. Craig, drew my attention to the important cooperative movement steadily growing in England. Footnote 8. This remarkable experiment of 1831, with its tragic termination, is related by Mr. Pear, Longman's Green and Company, and by Mr. Craig, Trubner. It is well worth the careful study of all cooperative reformers. End footnote. The abortive attempts at cooperative society which I had watched in the United States at Brook Farm, Red Bank, Eagleswood, and other places, in no way shook the faith that through failure and renewed effort, the true principles of a wise organization of human relations would gradually be evolved. The English cooperative movement was characteristic of the common sense, unambitious way in which reforms grow in England. The religious element introduced by such a noble band of Christian socialists as Maurice, Kingsley, Hughes, and Ludlow gave a hopefulness to this movement which no attempts based on a limited view of material well-being can afford. Medical experience was daily showing the influence of the mind over the body, and I eagerly longed to see an embodiment of Christian principles in society, which embodiment was, as yet, far from attainment. In pursuance of this investigation, at the end of August 1872, I determined to visit the Familistère of Guise, formed by Gaudin Lemaire. His book, Solutions Sociales, describing the growth of the institution, was exceedingly interesting and contained valuable suggestions for future workers, and I wished to see its practical working for myself. At the end of a fatiguing journey to Guise on the Belgian frontier of France, for at that time many miles had to be traversed by diligence, I was cordially welcomed by Monsieur le Maire and spent several very interesting days in the great Familistère, observing the life there. The Familistère, which accommodated several hundred people, was erected on a tract of land almost encircled by the river, which tract was laid out in gardens and pleasure grounds. Across the river stood the large factories and workshops for the manufacture of stoves, etc., which furnished the remunerative occupation of the little community. I attended the prize-giving at the schools, saw the theatre, workmen's club, and choral society, witnessed a ball, and visited the manufactory. The organization was a great object lesson both in its success and its defects, full of interest to those who seriously study this important subject of improved social relations. The life at the Familistère, however, was intense and rather overpowering to me. Shortly after my return, I was attacked by illness, which proved so serious in its effects that in 1873 the Burwood Place establishment was broken up and my plan of life necessarily changed. During the next 3 years, I vainly endeavored to resume my London work, but was frequently obliged to seek health in change of residence and foreign travel. This travel included a memorable winter in Rome, which need not be further referred to, although the approach to the Eternal City, when, across the Campagna, the dome of St. Peter's was first visible, was a thrilling personal joy, never to be forgotten. But my purely personal experiences will not be dwelt on. When the London School of Medicine for Women was established, I hastened my return and accepted the chair of gynecology in the college. In my lodgings in Dorset Square, I again suffered from atrocious biliary colic, which the able physicians whom I consulted were unable to relieve, finished my course of lectures with extreme difficulty, and came to the conclusion, with bitter disappointment, that any future residence in London under my circumstances must be given up. The winters of 1876 to 78 were spent chiefly at Bordighera and in Nice. An episode there is worth recording. My enlarging experience in various countries in respect to the relations between men and women, the customs, the diseases, the social disasters springing from errors as to human physiology and neglect in education with regard to the most important functions, showed me the imperative work which devolved upon the physician in this matter. I realized that the mind cannot be separated from the body in any profound view of the scope of medical responsibility. Under the olive trees of Bordighera, and sitting by its lovely blue sea, I meditated on the duty of the physician and finally wrote the small work, Counsel to Parents on the Moral Education of Their Children. So little at that time was the importance of sexual education understood and the necessity of its consideration accepted, that when I read my manuscript to a warm and enlightened English friend staying at Menton, she assured me that if I published that manuscript, my name would be a forbidden word in England. I sent the manuscript, however, to about 12 of the leading London publishers, who all declined the publication. I therefore printed a small edition myself, which a bookseller consented to keep on sale. A copy of this little book fell under the notice of Miss Ellis Hopkins, who, considering that it would be useful in the special work in which she was engaged, induced Mr. Hudson, the then acting member of the firm of Hatchard and Company, to reconsider the matter and publish the book for her use. The arrangement was made and the book printed. But soon after I received a letter saying that though the firm had never yet broken faith with an author, yet they feared they must do so now, for the senior member of the firm, Bishop Hatchard's widow, had seen the proof of the book, thrown it into the fire, and desired that its publication should be stopped. Finally, a little consultation of elderly clergymen was called to consider the subject, and it was at last resolved that if the name of the work could be changed, and the distinct announcement made in the title that it was a medical as well as a moral work, the publication might be continued. Of course, the change was made, and Counsel to Parents became The Moral Education of the Young, considered under medical and social aspects. I mention this curious experience as an encouragement to those who are engaged in all branches of moral work. Public sentiment has advanced since 1876. Looking now at the very reticent way in which the subject is treated in this little book, it is difficult to believe that such an episode could have occurred. It has become clear to me that our medical profession has not yet fully realized the special and weighty responsibility which rests upon it to watch over the cradle of the race, to see that human beings are well born, well nourished, and well educated. The onward impulse to this great work would seem to be especially incumbent upon women physicians, who for the first time are beginning to realize the all-important character of parentage in its influence upon the adult as well as on the child, i.e., on the race. The physician knows that the natural family group is the first essential element of a progressive society. The degeneration of that element by the degradation of either of its two essential factors, the man or the woman, begins the ruin of a state. It is a source of deep gratitude in a long medical life to have been enabled by physiological knowledge as well as experience to perceive the true point of view from which the special nature of man and woman must be regarded. It is well worth the efforts of a lifetime to have attained knowledge which justifies an attack on the root of all evil, viz., the deadly atheism which asserts that because forms of evil have always existed in society, therefore they must always exist, and that the attainment of a high ideal is a hopeless chimera. The study of human nature by women as well as men commences that new and hopeful era of the intelligent cooperation of the sexes through which alone real progress can be attained and secured. We may look forward with hope to the future influence of women physicians when, with sympathy and reverence, guiding intellectual activity, they learn to apply the vital principles of their great master to every method and practice of the healing art. Thank you for joining us for pioneer work in opening the medical profession to women by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. After a short break, we will resume with our next season. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find this and many other interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.